Today we'll be looking at representing decimals. There are three ways to do this. One way would be to create an equivalent decimal. Another way would be to write it in word form, or we can show it as a fraction. Now I have a decimal here, 0.9 or 9/10. So if I represent it three different ways here, I'm going to come down to an equivalent decimal. 9/10 would be the same as 90/100. The rule is you can add as many zeros after your decimal and it will not affect it. Now in word form, I would just write, just as I say the decimal, just write 9/10. And again, I know it's tenths because, as I mentioned in my last video, there is 1 0, and that 1 0 helps me remember that means that it's going to be one number to the right of the decimal. And then as a fraction, again, we just go back to how would you say it. We say 9/10, so that would be 9/10. You may remember doing things like this in our word collection box or our name collection box for numbers, and we've been doing this as we work through the grades. So let's practice a few of these. Here we have the number 0 and 65/100, or you could just say 65/100. So if I write this as an equivalent decimal, I can just add a 0 to the end. It's 650 thousandths. If I write this in words, I would write 65, just as I would for a normal number, a whole number, that is. And then since my 5 kind of gives me the name that I write next here, 65, it's 2 hops, excuse me, it's 2 hops away from the decimal. So in my mind I'm thinking that's 2 zeros, which I showed my thinking here in the fraction, so that would be 65/100ths. Do not forget that TH. It's a lot different than 65/100ths. And finally, I get to write a fraction. So my fraction, I just write it exactly how I say it. When I read this number, I said 65/100ths. So as a fraction, you just write 65/100ths or 65/100. Moving on to our next number, I upped the difficulty a little bit. Here we have 3 and 41 thousandths. Now the way I know it's thousandths, I write 1 over 1,000. I have 1, 2, 3 zeros, and I have 1, 2, 3 digits to the right of that place value. So that's how I knew that it was 41 thousandths rather than 41 hundredths, etc. So if I'm going to create my equivalent decimal, I need to keep the 3, I need to keep that 0, and the 4 and the 1. And again, I can add as many zeros after that 1 as I want, and it will not change anything. Now with number and words, we're looking at a whole number, so we say 3. The decimal point we will say and. We don't write point or dot. It's 3 and. Then our number here is 41. And then it ends in the, as I mentioned earlier, it ends in the thousandths place, so we need to make sure that we finish it off by writing the word thousandths. And then finally we look at this as a fraction. Now be careful. Some of you might be thinking, let's do this. But that would not be right. That would be less than 1. No, don't do that. We need to do 3 as a whole number, and then we have 41 thousandths, or 41 over 1,000. The last portion of representing decimals is what we call a thousandths grid. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to color code this so when we use it either for our homework or in class we have a general understanding. Believe it or not, there are actually 1,000 little rectangles on this grid. That's how it got its name, the thousandths grid. So I'm going to start with green. If you take an entire column from top to bottom, that would be a tenth. Likewise, you could go for an entire row. So the green would represent a tenth. A 100th would be, as you can see, there's kind of dark little squares there that I'm going to highlight. So I did my best to trace there. It's a little difficult, but any one of those little squares, that will equal 10. So that would be our 100th, and the most difficult one for me to try to outline, so I'll just have to color it in. The 1,000th would be one individual little rectangle. So if I come down here, that would just be one little rectangle. So when you're looking at this thousandths grid, it's a lot to look at. So what you will need to understand is, just to recap, the green represents 1/10. Because think of it this way, if you take 10 of those rows or 10 of those columns, it will equal the entire thing. 100th is represented in the blue, because if you counted up 100 of those, it would give you the entire, it would give you one. It would also give you 10 thousandths, which, when we learn how to simplify, that is the same as, because we can remove a 0 from the top and a 0 from the bottom, which is the same as 100th. And then a 1,000th is represented by one little rectangle. Now let's put what we just went over to work. We have the number 741 thousandths. So in short, we need to mark 741 of these little rectangles on this slide. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to break it down by place value. In the tenths, I have a 7, so I need to include 7 rows or 7 columns. I chose to do columns. Okay, so there's my tenths. There's 7 tenths. Now I need to do 4 hundredths. So that is going to be if you want, I can shade that in. That would be 4 boxes. And then my final one, and the trickiest one, would be the thousandths, and I need one little rectangle. Now, if you like, you could push them all together. I kept them separate so you could kind of see how I colored it in. If you notice, again, just to go over quickly, and that would be that since I had a 7 in the tenths place, I made sure to color in 7, and this would be our 7 tenths. I did 7 columns, and then in my hundredths place there's a 4, so I colored in here in the purple. I colored in 4 boxes of 10 each, or 40 thousandths, and for my 100 thousandths, for my thousandths I colored in one little rectangle.